The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. Our newsies this week are on the phone, Chris Larrabee, a reporter with the Greenfield Recorder, and in studio today, Jim Kinney, a reporter with the Republican newspaper, and NEPM's own Adam Frenier. Welcome all. If you, dear listeners, have thoughts, rebuttals, questions, email us at therundown@nepm.org. All right, panel, let's run it down. Ire once again this week at the University of Massachusetts Amherst over the on-campus arrests earlier this month of about 130 pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Faculty and librarians on Monday took a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Javier Reyes. The measure passed 473 to 332 with 20 abstentions. In very brief here, the no confidence resolution says Reyes' choice to involve police created an unsafe environment, and then Reyes has said that he's responsible for the safety of the entire campus and that the encampment jeopardized that. I'll just say here that the NEPM's main radio station signal is held by UMass Amherst. This program operates independently. All right, fellas, thoughts on whether this no confidence vote was timely action or a rush to judgment? Jim Kinney.
It comes really early in his tenure. He only got installed a few weeks ago, and he's only been on campus maybe less than a year. So he maybe doesn't have the relationships it would take to navigate this in an easier way. I'm also curious as to what happens in August and September when people are back on campus. Obviously, it's going to calm down now. The place is empty.
Graduation happened over the weekend. We saw some protests even there at graduation. And Reyes said in a statement that faculty, students, and staff with this vote, and there were two previous no confidence votes from student groups in recent weeks, these have sent a clear signal that we have work to do. That's a quote from Reyes. So still, there's support for Reyes from both UMass President Marty Meehan and the members of the board, so it's not as if everyone holds this same opinion. And the vote came after a motion to censure had failed. Now, the distinction there being that censure would have demonstrated disapproval of this specific situation. And maybe getting to a bit of what you were saying, Jim, is he hasn't been there that long. How can we say we have no confidence in his leadership? We haven't seen much of it. But then the no confidence speaks more broadly about that leadership from Reyes. Adam, what do you make of this decision to go with no confidence instead of a censure?
Well, all of this, Carrie, is obviously purely symbolic. You know, the faculty senate can offer its opinion. It can, do what it wants in this case, but all it is their opinion. So, obviously it's a strong suggestion that they are very, very unhappy about how the chancellor has handled the situation. And if you look at it from the perspective of Reyes, he was in a no-win situation no matter what he did. If he allowed the encampment to stay, maybe violating some of the university's own policies and setting a precedent that this was okay, the next time it happened and he maybe tried to go differently, he would have said, people would have said, well, you let it stand the last time. But on the other hand, he had to have known there was going to be blowback if he did order it taken down. So I think he was in a position where he wasn't going to win. I'm sure he understood that. There's a lot of other college administrators out there that have been in the same position.
Several no confidence votes we've seen in similar demonstration situations tied to these pro-Palestinian demonstrators opposing connections to Israel or support for Israel. Regarding this no confidence vote, several of the faculty and librarians thought it should have been postponed, that there were some tech issues getting the ballot distributed to some people online. There were folks in Zoom. There were folks in the actual hall there at UMass for this impromptu meeting. And then there were also some calls for an investigation into the arrest, just kind of saying in general, hey, let's slow this all down and try and figure out what led to the arrests. Among those people who said time to slow this down was Associate Professor Ray LaRaja. And he said, quote, "We owe it to students to show how we deliberate over evidence rather than rush to a decision. We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the university. Chris, the meeting this week about this issue lasted for about 4 hours. Obviously, a vote was taken, but do you think we might see continued calls for an investigation as La Raja called for?
Yeah, I think, this stuff's just going to keep going on, especially, and just bringing this back a step to the national context. It's such a pressure cooker of a situation for all these schools. We talk about timeliness, should they have done this? Should they have done that? That a lot of these things are just based off snap decisions. And I think it's just going to keep going here as, pressure mounts across the country.
I think it will be interesting to watch over the summers now that graduations have started to happen, will continue to happen in the next several weeks. If we'll see students continue this or if they'll just kind of move on with their lives this summer as they go off to internships or do whatever it is that they have planned for the summer season. Well, let's go ahead and turn to our next story where confidence among some home sellers is likely riding high. The headline here, mass home sales spring to life in April. I do not get credit for that pun. That is State House News Service. Thank you very much. It's that time of year, though, where the dirty and dingy afterglow of the Northeast winter has been whisked away and flowers are blooming and the sun is shining and everyone wants to make their houses look really great ahead of what is traditionally a time to get them on the market, right? And because of this is a time that we traditionally see more houses coming onto the market, maybe that's why, Jim Kinney, you took a look at this issue. You got a little curious about what home sales were doing last month, and you found that median sales price of a single-family home in the Pioneer Valley was up again last month. That price is now more than $335,000. What stood out to you, Jim, as you took a look at this issue?
That number, that $335,000 number is a lot.
Sure
and is obviously outpacing people's incomes. In talking with realtors, their first message is it's a great time to buy. That's what they kind of always say.
Easy. I am also a realtor in my side hustle. I'm kidding. Go ahead. Keep going.
But they don't have much to sell you. If you look deeper into the numbers, their inventory is down. They don't have a lot coming on the market, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. Some of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. People don't see a lot on the market, so they don't want to put their place up for sale for fear they won't have anywhere to go.
And they also have probably great interest rates compared to what they're currently going to land if they go to finance their next place to live.
Yes, and baby boomers are holding on to the family house a little longer than maybe a previous generation did. So they're hoping, the real estate people that I talk to are hoping that maybe the summer kind of breaks a bit of a log jam. Maybe they get some good news on interest rates. They've been saying that for a while, and it seems like the Fed is moving at its own pace. In the meantime, I asked, what advice do you have for the first-time buyer? Because that's somebody who really might be starting to get a little nervous. And a lot of that is psychological. You're going to get turned down a bunch of times, apparently, if you're out there as a first-time buyer.
There are fewer houses to bid on, so people are going to have to say yes to one and no to quite a few, probably, is the likelihood. Something else I've been watching, though, too, as being in this industry, is people who maybe are being priced out at that single-family home and the $335,000 mark, and in the Berkshires, it might be even quite a bit higher. They did theirs, did a quarterly look, and first quarter, the median sales price there, the average sales price there, $445,000. So even more expensive there in the Berkshires. So I've been seeing people switch to multifamily homes even who can say, all right, fine, maybe I won't go for that 1,300 square foot single family home. I'll live in something possibly slightly smaller and have a renter help me pay for part of what I'm doing here. There was a report out just yesterday from the Pioneer Institute that points out that the high housing crisis can really be a detriment to keeping young people in the area because they want a place that's affordable to live. Chris, I believe that you went to college in the Boston area, right? And then you made your way back to your Western Mass roots here. Did housing costs play a role in that decision?
I would say, certainly. I think we all know journalism is, not at the high end of pay. So, rent is certainly a consideration. I will say, not my personal experience, but my brother's personal experience. He lived in Boston for 7 years, and he just moved to Springfield because, housing prices are so outrageous in Boston. And obviously, it's still pretty high up out here. And we talk about, like houses on the market. I was at a listening session last week with the housing secretary and the lieutenant governor at Greenfield Community College. And they kind of just threw out some numbers that were kind of shocking. They talk about a healthy housing ecosystem should have anywhere between 4 and 5% vacancy rate, and that means houses for sale or for rent. In Massachusetts, it's only 1.6%, and then Franklin County specifically is only 0.7%. So I think that squeeze is probably just driving the prices even higher.
Yeah, and speaking to what your brother experienced, if you look at the statewide median for Massachusetts for housing, it's over $600,000. So you can see why, if perhaps he's telecommuting, I'm not exactly sure his specifics, but
yeah, he's working remotely.
Yeah, certainly that's helping the situation, right? We can see people who could work from almost anywhere. Adam, Governor Maura Healey's $4.1 billion housing bond bill has been pending before the legislature since the fall. Now, the legislature has said that this is something on the to-do list this session. So this session ends July 31st. With 2 months-ish to go, do you think that the legislature will see them take action on this?
That's a really good question, because you also have the matter of trying to figure out the state budget in there, too, which obviously takes a lot of time and often is late. I think they'll try to come to some sort of an agreement. It seems like housing is certainly a priority across all the chambers of the state legislature. But that number you mentioned, that's a big number in a year where the budget already is going to be a little bit tight. But they have to try to do something, whether it's $4 billion, $3 billion, whatever. This is a problem from Beckett to Boston. It doesn't matter where you are in Massachusetts. There just isn't enough housing right now, and something needs to be done to try to generate more of it. And this could be a good first step if the legislature, particularly the House and the Senate, can get on the same page and agree to something.
They're currently each chewing on their own versions of something in the approximation of $58 billion proposals. The House side thinks a touch lower than that. But this bond bill from Governor Healey has some somewhat controversial provisions in it proposed, all in the eye, or much of it with a lens toward creating more affordable housing units. I think among the proposals is what would be a transfer tax on the sale of some homes. So obviously homeowners not too keen on the potential for that idea, but on the other end, affordable housing advocates like the idea that there might be some funding potentially coming their way to help ease this gap. I think we are about 200,000 housing units short. I think Governor Healey said something along those lines last year. Well, certainly an issue that will be a perennial issue, just like the spring, I suppose, in some ways. And speaking of housing, still to come here on the Rundown, our panel will chew the fat over the next steps underway of what's believed to be the largest mill redevelopment in New England and other mill happenings. And I'm betting that there are now more grumpy wagerers out there after sports betting companies decided not to dish on its restrictions of how much or how often some people can bet. If you have thoughts or questions, email us therundown@nepm.org. You're listening to The Rundown. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Rundown. I'm Carrie Saldo here with Chris Larrabee, reporter for the Greenfield Recorder, Jim Kinney, a reporter with The Republican, and NEPM's Adam Frenier. Welcome back to all of you. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey said last year, as I mentioned, that Massachusetts is short about 200,000 housing units across the state. And there are currently several projects underway in Western Massachusetts that will attempt to close that shortfall, and something, it's coming in increments, right? 50 units here, 12 units there, drips and drabs, getting housing projects from concept to completion, and then arguably the most important step, right, up and running so that housing can be filled by actual people who need it. That can take decades, if not decades, and especially if we're talking about something that we have plenty of here in Western Massachusetts, vacant mill buildings. Jim Kinney, you recently reported on some of the next steps that are underway at what's believed to be the largest mill redevelopment in New England, Ludlow Mills, which is mixed use, right? That means it has a combo of housing and other things.
It's got a brewery.
It does. Not that you would know personally. But what's the latest news there on Ludlow Mills?
They got a new EPA grant that's going to fund cleanup of some toxic substances. It was built at a time when everything was made out of asbestos.
Mm-hmm. And they're using PCBs as lubrication and other things in the manufacturing process here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, it's all over the place. So they've been using EPA money and state environmental cleanup money very incrementally to go through these buildings and clean them up and prepare them for redevelopment. The wind companies is close to completion on 90 units in that would be the main building. If you've ever been to Ludlow, it's the giant clock tower over downtown.
Yeah.
That's the image on your high school class ring, I've been told.
Yeah.
If you grew up in town.
It's a huge part of the landscape, as are mills really across the western Massachusetts region. I can think of almost any community, and you either have one that's there still potentially in use, or at least there turning into maybe a skeleton of what it once was, with the hopes that in someday it might be revitalized similarly to the Ludlow Mills project. Now, beyond Ludlow, like I'm saying, there's other mills underway or recently opened. I'm thinking of in Williamstown, the Cable Mills project or the Photech Mills. And I remember 20 or so years ago when each of those projects was just like a twinkle in the eyes of developers and officials there who were hoping that this would help them grapple with that housing shortage even then. Adam and Lee, dirt is flying at the Eagle Mills after 12 years. The Berkshire Eagle's Greg Sukinnick reported this week that the first phase will become 56 housing units, and we're looking at probably 130-ish overall. These mills across western Massachusetts were lifeblood, but it's complicated, it's costly. Are you ever surprised that these projects get done at all?
Well, when they are completed, I think it's cause for celebration, because not only is it a long, arduous process, as Jim pointed out, but also it's bringing in, much needed affordable housing units. I know in that Eagle article about the Lee Mill, people are just ecstatic that there's more places to live in Lee now that they can actually maybe afford. I had a chance a few years ago, the Cabottville Mill building in Chicopee, which has had some safety issues, which has been, in and out of sales and such. I had a chance to walk through there and doing some reporting, and you look at some of these old mill buildings, you can see the potential, but you can also see the danger too if they're not kept up. There's those toxic substances. Those buildings are made out of wood and they're really dried out, and that was part of the concern in Chicopee, and they want to try to get that redeveloped, but they've had trouble with the owners, and there's a really another side of the coin there too. You have to try to do something with these properties, or they're just going to sit there and be potential liabilities from a safety perspective.
Well, and there's also then government, right? Because code has to come in, building department has to come in and say, to your point, how do we make these safe? And a lot of the times, one of the big steps is sprinklers, and it's not a sexy thing, but it's certainly necessary. Yeah, Jim.
We've all, as reporters, covered when one of these things catches on fire.
Yeah.
And burns for days. I'm thinking of Russell. I know it's happened in Turner's, Orange, maybe a summer or two ago. That's one of the big fears.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, what are you keeping an eye on out there in Greenfield relative to mill development and this issue of housing in general?
Yeah, so we're a little bit behind some of these other projects here, but there's really two big ones that are being considered in the county right now. We got we just mentioned it here, the one in Turner's Falls that set on fire. The Strathmore Mill. Montague just got a grant. I think it's about $4.9 million for the demolition of it. Obviously, that's a project I think it's been unused since 2007. So, here we are in 2024, and they finally got a grant that might help them demolish it. We're still maybe a long ways away from that. And then in Irving, they've been struggling with the International Paper Mill building, and they've been trying to figure out what portions of that to demolish, what to keep around. I think they only had maybe a handful of RFPs that came out for use of the building, and they had to reject it due to, I think the application wasn't complete. So I think we're at the beginning step for the international paper mill. Maybe to Strathmore, maybe in a couple of years it might finally come down. But like we mentioned, it's a long process. There's a lot of hoops you got to get through.
Yeah, and it's tricky. It's not as simple as one wide-eyed developer coming in and saying, "Hey, let's make this project happen." It's often a combination of grant funding, state funding, federal funding, private dollars, and bridge loans, and just all of these financial mechanisms that need to be carefully considered and figured and then put into effect. But clearly we've seen many, many instances of where it has gone from concept to completion. You've got the Eastworks Mill and quite a few others. In North Adams, you've seen them redeveloped into housing and retail, et cetera. And I think also I'm just always so excited when it does work out, because I think that these mills are a part of what makes Western Massachusetts unique. I mean, certainly in some instance, you could say it'd be much easier to let them sit there and rot. I would say tear them down, but that's so complicated because of all of the environmental pieces.
And they're also history too, Carrie. I mean, think about our manufacturing past, and all the places that you mentioned, they're a sign of what used to drive these communities, decades and centuries ago. And if you can repurpose them and keep that little piece of the historical touch, I think it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my grandparents used to live in one of the mills in Adams, which was turned into apartments. And downstairs, they had pictures of this is what mill life used to be like. And so it was nice to have that touch point every time you walked into the building. Well, Adam Frenier, let's turn to a different story that you took a look at this week. Sports betting companies balk at discussing limits on bettors. And we could also just say that this is perhaps an ongoing segment of this program where you help Carrie learn about sports. And today's topic is sports betting. It's come to light that some sportsbook operators limit bettors who routinely win. And the Massachusetts Gaming Commission was set to chat it up with about 10 sports betting companies about this possibility. But all bets were off this week because companies wanted a closed-door meeting, and the gaming commissioners rightly said this is a public entity. Business is conducted in plain view of the public. The companies decided, we're not going to participate. Adam, your reaction to this move by these 10 companies?
Well, I don't think it's surprising. A lot of the policies that they have are proprietary. They're private businesses. They don't want to let the competition know what's going on. They don't want to expose their secrets. In reading some of the written testimony and communication to the commission, they wanted to go into executive session to discuss it, so it did not become public. Well, the problem is a lot of the public don't know why they're being limited or why they're being, excluded. Now, to really quickly summarize this, the sports books can limit how much a person wagers for pretty much any reason. Maybe they've done something a little nefarious to the customer. Or it could be a case, and some of the people who submitted written testimony who are customers of these entities say, I got a little hot, I started to win, and then the next thing I know, I couldn't make a bet over $5. And this isn't just a Massachusetts problem, it's a nationwide problem, and the commission wanted to look into that, and often there's no notification, there's no limit like at a blackjack table, so a lot of these customers are frustrated, and they're saying, I'm not winning huge sums of money here, I'm just winning consistently.
But this is all within allowable law currently?
Yes, currently.
And that's the challenge. So now the Gaming Commission is considering, should we perhaps change that? And the idea was to get some more information to help educate themselves. Gaming Commissioner Brad Hill was none too pleased about these no-shows this week. Here's part of what he said.
There was a lot more information we should have and could have gotten today that we didn't get, and it was very disappointing to me.
It doesn't seem like harsh words, but from a public commissioner to say, they're disappointed in something, sometimes that's a bigger signal. We did hear from some bettors, even though we didn't hear from those members of the sports books. One was Alec McCarron, who pointed out what he thinks is a double standard, that sports books limit bettors playing within the rules and winning, while they're also offering maybe VIP programs or other targeted advertisements or incentives to keep people who perhaps aren't so great at gambling, keep them coming back and possibly losing. Do you think here, Jim, that McCarron is right that this allows companies to have it both ways and kind of unfairly control both revenue and expense?
Yeah, they're not in business to pay you. So they're going to be very careful on this. It's all computer controlled. It's all some kind of an algorithm that they obviously don't want to expose. I'd love to know this guy's real winning percentage? Does he really win as much as he thinks he does? And I'd also like to know how this impacts people who are betting at the in-person sports books. Did we go into that?
They did a little bit, Jim, and there was one person who said he wagers regularly at the Plain Ridge Park Casino, and they started to require him to use one of those player cards every time he went so that they could track his action. So they can also restrict bets in person.
And we didn't hear a ton from the gaming, the sports books because they didn't come. But where are they falling on this, Adam?
Well, I think they don't want to say it out loud in public, but I think it's an accepted practice. If you're winning too much, we're going to reel you in a little bit and try to attract people that maybe aren't as skillful or people that are making huge bets. And it's kind of ironic to me, Carrie. I have never used an illegal sports wagering site or a bookie or anything like that. They do that too. You get a little hot, all of a sudden they don't really want your action, or they may forget your phone number. But the difference is, if you make the bet with the legal sports book, you're going to get paid. Make it with the bookie, you might not.
Yeah, and other things could happen too. Chris, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just think about the optics of the situation. Cutting off bettors. Like, do you think they're involved in maybe fixing games? And I don't think that's the case. I think like we mentioned, it's probably just computer algorithms identifying these people. But you just got to think of the perception of this, and kind of walking a fine line with sports and betting and leagues partnering with these companies. It's, certainly something to keep an eye on.
Adam, briefly, where will this go next?
Well, I think the Gaming Commission's trying to figure that out, trying to figure out the best way to get some of that data and some of that information from the sportsbook operators. And I think the other thing is they're trying to figure out how they can actually go through and change it. A lot of their rules are legislative or done through the legislative process. Obviously, that takes time.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll head to our predictions and scoops portion of the show where we ask you to make a prediction about the week's news or maybe dish on a story that you're working on. Adam Frenier, go ahead.
My prediction is the Massachusetts state budget completed will be late again this year. They have until June 30th to do it. The Senate passed their version on Friday night. There's a lot of differences between the version the House passed and what Governor Maura Healey proposed. This has been, an annual routine where it's been very late. Although one thing that might change that a little bit, it's an election year, so the representatives and senators have some campaigning to do this summer too.
What is that saying? If past is prologue, I think you might be right there, Adam Frenier. Chris Larrabee, how about for you? Scoop, prediction, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure what you guys are seeing in your areas here, but the big thing in Franklin County is solar projects. We're seeing maybe battery storage in Wendell and a lot of bylaws being thrown out by the Attorney General's office. The new thing is a company in Northfield that already has 3 arrays approved has come before the town again for another array in a similar area, and residents are seeming really outraged, I would say.
Well, you'll be keeping an eye on that for us for sure. And Jim Kinney, what do you think of today?
The flags out in front of Justice Alito's house are going to start to spell out riddles like on the beer coasters,
like Narragansett has there on the bar, where you have to figure out like B4 and figure out what the different letters and symbols figure out.
Exactly. It'll be a national parlor
really
game.
Hard.
It'll be fun.
I am fascinated by that idea, and I'll be thinking about what those flags might possibly spell out. Well, so for me, I'm going to add a new element to our predictions and scoop this week. I'm going to add praise, and my praise goes this week to the Griswold Memorial Library in Coleraine. Its exceptional contributions landed it the nation's highest honor for their division, a National Medal for Museum and Library Service. The museum dubs itself a portal to local history, lifelong learning. They have tech help, and they even have a pop-up library at the dump. The official award will come later this summer from the Institute of Museum and Library Services at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. So congratulations to the Griswold Memorial Library out there in Coleraine. A thank you to our panelists today, Chris Larrabee, Jim Kinney, and Adam Frenier. The rundown music is courtesy of the Love Crumbs. Our director is Tony Dunn. Our board op is Kara Foster. Additional team spirit today provided by Chris Schwantner, and digital is by IU Suryawan. I'm Carrie Saldo. Thanks for listening to The Rundown.